I want to tell you something before this story begins. I'm not ashamed anymore. It took me a long time to get to that sentence, longer than I want to admit. There were weeks, actual weeks, where I could not look at myself in the bathroom, mirror without feeling a hot, crawling disgust that had nothing to do with anything I had actually done wrong. There were mornings I stood in the shower until the water went cold, like I was trying to wash off something that had no physical form. There were nights I lay completely still in the dark, phone face down on the nightstand, terrified it would light up again, terrified of one name appearing on that screen. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Not with the threats. Not with the terror. Not with the bathroom floor at 2 a.m. Let me start with the dinner. The candles. The laugh I heard from across a crowded table that made me look up from my conversation without knowing why. Let me start with the night I met Daniel. It was a mutual friend's birthday. One of those loud, warm, slightly chaotic restaurant gatherings where 3 separate conversations are happening simultaneously and the candles keep flickering every time someone laughs too hard. I almost didn't go. I had a work deadline the following morning and I was tired in that specific way that settles into your shoulders and makes everything feel like an effort. But I went. And he was sitting directly across from me. Daniel was 30 years old, dark eyes. The kind of face that looks comfortable with itself. Not arrogant, just settled. He had this quality that I noticed almost immediately and could not quite name at the time. When I spoke, he actually listened. Not the polite, surface-level listening that people perform at social gatherings. The real kind. The kind where someone's eyes stay on your face and they ask a follow-up question that proves they absorbed what you actually said, not just the shape of it. I talked about my job. He asked a question that showed he understood what I did. I mentioned my sister's upcoming graduation. He smiled and said his younger sister had graduated the previous year and described how his mother had cried through the entire ceremony. Small things, normal things, but the texture of the conversation felt different from most conversations. I had at crowded tables with people I'd just met. He texted me before I got home that night. It was really good to meet you. I hope the deadline goes okay tomorrow. I stood in my kitchen reading that text and felt something quiet and warm settle in my chest. We had our first proper date 5 days later. Coffee that turned into a long walk that turned into dinner that turned into sitting on a bench by the river. At 10 o'clock at night, still talking. Neither of us wanting to be the one to say it was time to go home. For the first 4 months, Daniel was everything I had quietly hoped a relationship could feel like. He remembered the small things, the name of my childhood dog, the professor whose class gave me anxiety every Thursday morning, the specific way I liked my tea, the film I mentioned once in passing that I'd always meant to watch. He showed up to my sister's graduation, even though he'd only met my family twice, and sat beside my mother the whole afternoon, and charmed her completely. He drove 40 minutes, through heavy rain on a Tuesday evening because I'd had a terrible day at work and texted him that I just needed someone to sit with me. He arrived with takeout and asked no questions and just sat beside me on the sofa while I decompressed. I fell in love with him the way you fall into sleep when you're truly exhausted. Gradually, completely, and without quite noticing the exact moment it happened. I trusted him with everything. Not the cautious, provisional kind of trust that keeps one foot near the exit. The deep kind. The kind you build brick by brick over shared meals and early mornings and the 1,000 small moments that slowly stitch 2 people's lives together. And during those months, those good, warm, real months. Our relationship became intimate, in all the ways that relationships between 2 adults in love naturally do. That included, at various points, sharing private photos with each other. I want to be direct about this, because it matters enormously to everything that comes later. Sharing private, intimate images with a romantic partner is something millions of people do every single day. It is a normal, human expression of trust and intimacy between 2 people in a private relationship. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. Nothing shameful. Nothing that requires explanation or defense. The act of sharing those photos was not a mistake. It was an act of love and trust directed at someone I genuinely believed deserved both. He knew my family. He had sat at our dinner table. He knew my father's traditional values. He knew what those images would mean if they ever reached the wrong hands. He filed that knowledge away quietly, like something he might need later, like an insurance policy. He hoped he would never have to use but wanted ready just in case. I did not know that then. I was just in love. The shift was so gradual that I almost missed it entirely. Relationships change over time. Everyone knows that. The early electricity settles into something quieter, more domestic. That is normal. That is not what happened with Daniel. What happened with Daniel was something different. Something that operated below the surface of normal adjustment, in the quiet spaces between ordinary moments. It started with the phone. He began picking it up when it buzzed near him. Casually, without asking, just glancing at the screen and setting it down. The first time it happened, I told myself it meant nothing. The second time I mentioned, lightly, that I preferred my privacy. He laughed. Actually laughed, like I had said something slightly absurd. I wasn't reading it, I just looked at it. Why are you being so sensitive about it? That word. Sensitive. It would become one of his most frequently used tools over the following months. A small, precise instrument for making me question my own reasonable reactions. He started having opinions about who I spent time with. A male colleague I mentioned in passing. Someone I had worked with for 2 years and thought of as purely professional, became a source of quiet, sustained tension. Daniel never said anything directly accusatory. He was far too measured for that. He would just go quiet, or change the subject, or respond to something I said with a flat, one-word answer that communicated displeasure without ever giving me anything concrete to address. A weekend trip I had planned with my university friends. 3 women I had known for years was met with 3 days of cold, careful distance that I knew was punishment and could not prove was punishment because he never once admitted that's what it was. He never said, "Don't go." He just made the cost of going quietly persistently high. I started changing myself in small ways to manage his reactions, removing certain names from stories before I told them, pausing before I answered questions to calculate his likely response first, choosing my words less for honesty and more for safety. I told myself relationships required compromise, that loving someone meant adjusting, that I was perhaps being, that word again, too sensitive. The self-editing became automatic. I stopped noticing I was doing it, and that, I understand now, was exactly the point. He was not trying to control me loudly and dramatically. He was trying to make the cage so comfortable and familiar that I would eventually stop noticing the bars. By the time I finally acknowledged to myself that something was deeply wrong, I had been slowly disappearing inside the relationship for months. The conversation where I ended things took 3 hours. I had rehearsed it for weeks. I sat across from him at my kitchen table and I said the things I had been carrying quietly for so long, that I felt monitored, that I felt afraid of his silences, that I had lost track of who I was before I started measuring every word against his reactions. He listened. He was very calm. He said he understood. He stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out of my apartment without raising his voice once. I cried that night, for the relationship, for the months I'd spent shrinking myself, for the particular grief of ending something you once genuinely loved. But underneath the sadness was something else. Something I had almost forgotten the feeling of. Space, air, the quiet, exhausted relief of a decision finally made. That relief lasted exactly 4 days. His first message came on a Thursday evening. I was at my kitchen table eating dinner alone, laptop open, watching something. I can no longer remember because the moment my phone screen lit up with his name, everything else in the room ceased to exist. I think you should reconsider leaving. I have private photos of you. Photos your family would find very difficult to see. Come back or I will send them. You have 24 hours to think about it. I read it once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might change what the words meant. My fork was still in my hand. I set it down very carefully, like sudden movement might make something worse. The food went cold in front of me. The laptop kept playing. I sat completely motionless for a long time. I genuinely cannot tell you how long, while something cold and heavy settled into my chest and did not move. Then came the second message, a screenshot, partially obscured, blurred just enough that it wasn't fully explicit but sharp, enough that I knew with absolute certainty what it was. And below the image, a draft message, with my father's email address already typed into the recipient line. The sound I made was not a cry. It was something quieter and worse than a cry. A kind of internal collapse, the feeling of the floor, dropping away beneath you while the room stays perfectly still around you. My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped my phone and it hit the floor and I sat there staring at it for several minutes before I could make myself pick it up again. I want to describe that specific terror carefully because I think it is important that you understand what this kind of threat actually does to a person. It was not simply fear. It was a compound, suffocating sensation made of several things simultaneously. Panic. Shame that had no logical basis but felt overwhelming regardless. The specific horror of something, deeply private, being threatened, with violent exposure, and underneath all of it, a crushing isolation. Because who could I tell? How could I say these words out loud to another human being? How could I hand my mother or my father or my closest friend a sentence that began with "Aren't he has private photos of me," without feeling like the ground would open up and swallow me entirely? That isolation was not an accident. He had designed for it. He had chosen his weapon, specifically because he knew it would be almost impossible for me to speak about. He was counting on the shame doing his work for him. Over the following 9 days, he ran a campaign that I now understand was calculated and deliberate. Some days the messages were coldly threatening, specific, detailed descriptions of exactly which photos he had and exactly who he planned to send them to. Other days they were almost soft. "I don't want to do this. I still love you. Just come back and all of this disappears." That alternation was not random. It was a technique. Keep the target off balance, oscillate between terror and tenderness so she never knows which version of you she is dealing with and can never fully harden herself against either one. I went to work every single day of those 9 days. I sat in meetings. I answered emails. I had normal conversations with colleagues about normal things, and inside I was completely hollow. I stopped eating properly. Food tasted like nothing. Sitting down to a meal felt impossible. I slept in fragments, waking at 3 or 4 in the morning with my heart already pounding, before I was fully conscious. I lost weight I didn't have to lose. I developed a persistent, low-grade headache that lived behind my left eye for the entire 9 days, and I told absolutely no one. The silence he had counted on was working exactly as he had planned, until the night I called the helpline. I want to be honest about what made me finally dial that number, because I think the honest version matters more than a heroic one. It was not a moment of sudden courage. There was no clear turning point where I decided I was done being afraid. It was simply exhaustion. Complete, total, bone-deep exhaustion. I was sitting on my bathroom floor at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning, back against the cold wall, phone in both hands, and I could not physically, emotionally could not, carry the weight of it alone for 1 more hour. I typed the words, "Someone is threatening to share my private photos," into a search bar. A helpline number appeared. I stared at it for a long time. Then I pressed call before the part of my brain that had been silencing me for 9 days could stop me. A woman answered. Her voice was calm and steady and completely without shock or judgment. I started talking and I could not stop. 9 days of silence pouring out in fragments. Not even in the right order. Just pieces of it tumbling out into the phone in the dark of my bathroom floor. She listened to all of it. Then she said something that I want you to hear clearly if you are watching this and recognizing any part of what I am describing. She said, "What he is doing has a name. It is a crime. It is called image-based abuse, and it is also called sextortion. And you have significantly more power in this situation than he has allowed you to believe." I started crying so hard I could not speak for almost a full minute. Not from sadness, from relief, from the specific, overwhelming relief of being believed, of having someone hear the words and not recoil from them, of being told that the shame I had been drowning in for 9 days did not belong to me. Over the days that followed, with the helpline's guidance, I built my case methodically. I screenshotted every message, every threat, every draft email. I saved everything to a secure location he had no access to. I contacted a legal advisor through the helpline's network who confirmed clearly what Daniel was doing was criminal, image-based abuse, blackmail, both prosecutable offenses. I filed a formal police report with full documentation. Within 72 hours of the legal process beginning, Daniel went completely silent. No more messages, no more threats, no more oscillating between terror and tenderness. Just silence, the kind that told me everything I needed to know about how much his power had ever actually been real versus how much of it had existed only in my fear. He never sent the photos. He never had the power to destroy me. He only ever had the power I gave him by staying silent. I need to speak to you directly now, not as Lily, as someone who has been on that bathroom floor and wants to make absolutely certain that if you are there right now, or if someone you love is there, you know exactly what to do. What Daniel did has a name: image-based abuse, also called sextortion or non-consensual intimate image threat. In the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, Canada, and dozens of other countries. This is a criminal offense. The person threatening you can be arrested, charged, and prosecuted. The law exists. Use it. Here is exactly what to do. First, do not comply. Giving him what he wants does not end the threat. It confirms that the threat works, and he will use it again and again. Compliance is not safety. It is a longer trap. Second, do not delete anything. Every message, every threat, every screenshot he sends you is evidence. Save all of it immediately to somewhere he cannot access. A separate email account. Cloud storage, a trusted person's device. Third, tell one person. Just one. Say the words out loud. The shame you are feeling is not yours in the moment you speak it to another human. Being it begins to lose its grip on you. Start with one person you trust completely. Fourth, contact a helpline. The Cyber Civil Rights Initiative at cybercivilrights.org. The Revenge Porn Helpline at revengepornhelpline.org.uk. The National Domestic Abuse Hotline at thehotline.org. These organizations have people trained specifically for exactly this situation. They will not judge you. They will help you build a path forward. Fifth, report it to the police. You have documentation. You have a crime that has been committed against you. You have every legal right to pursue it. And finally, hear this clearly. You did nothing wrong. Trusting someone you loved was not a mistake. Sharing something private with a partner was not a mistake. The only person in this story who made a mistake was the person who chose to weaponize your trust. That is entirely, completely, 100% on him. The most powerful thing Daniel ever possessed was my silence. The moment I broke it, he had nothing. Your voice is not the problem. It is the only solution. Lily survived. And so can you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose bathroom floor moment you might interrupt.